I'd love to talk about carnism because like that's how our worlds collided is really with your incredible book, Why We Eat Pigs and
we wear cows and we love dogs.
And we love dogs. Why we eat pigs, love dogs, and wear cows.
Well, the parts are right in just in different orders.
I knew it.
But that's sort of the whole point of the title.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's such a good title. But carnism is a phrase which you've
coined.
You've coined, and it's such a because we grew up eating meat as people did. That was just what everyone did. Our parents did it. Society did. That was just normal. And you know, unbeknownst that would happen, we were 21 or 22 and we realized that eating meat was optional. It wasn't a necessity, and we stopped eating animals from there on and realized that it wasn't what we wanted to do, and there was a lot of injustices and oppression around it. And you've coined the word carnism, which is really this. You're better talking about it than me. Do you mind telling us what carnism is?
So carnism is the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals. It's the opposite of veganism, basically. And, you know, often we assume that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system. But the only reason we might eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because we do have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. So this is one way to think about carnism. It's this invisible belief system, though. Still, it's largely invisible because it's dominant. And sometimes people say, well, you know, in the West, we eat pigs but not dogs. But in some places, they eat dogs. But carnism is, you know, it's a global system. So in meat-eating cultures around the world, people, you know, all learn to classify a small handful of animals as edible, and all the rest they classify as inedible and disgusting to consume. It's just that the type of species consumed changes from culture to culture, but the way we think about and relate to the species that we've learned to classify as edible is the same. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. So whether it's dogs that you're eating or pigs that you're eating or cows that you're eating, we all have learned carnism has basically created this mentality in all of us that are born into carnism.
And it's the same formula applies to that, because if I'm going to eat an animal, I'm obviously not respecting its dignity because I believe that I'm morally, quite likely morally superior because I'm taking its life. Like I'm part of the process of taking its life,
That's
whether
right.
I'm just eating it or.
But you don't even notice that. Like, I thought it was fascinating what you said there, that it's like vegetarian or vegan, it's a choice. But also carnism is a choice, but we don't even know it. It's just it's the default. It's the default setting.
It's a bit like unrelational, or what do you call it?
Dysregulated. Or
poor relationships is the norm. Like, you know, most relationships aren't about mutual understanding. It's about so many other subtle things. It's a bit like carnism is just the norm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And it's tricky with carnism. It's a choice and it's not a choice at the same time, right? Without awareness, there's no free choice. And when people aren't aware, like, you know, when I grew up eating animals, and throughout so much of my life, nobody ever asked me how I felt about eating animals, if I wanted to eat animals, if I believed in eating animals. Eating animals was just the way things are. You know, it was just a given. It was the norm. And so I never felt that I was actively making a choice when it came to eating animals. It was a choice, but it wasn't a choice that was like a conscious choice.
Yeah.
You know, so talking about carnism is really important for, I think, a lot of different reasons. But one important reason is because it makes it really clear that there is a choice. There's, you know, when you are eating animals, you can choose not to eat animals. You know, this is one belief system, but there are other belief systems that exist as well. Veganism is not, you know, a belief system, and eating animals is just somehow morally neutral or a neutral set of behaviors. But maybe even more importantly is that carnism is not just a belief system. It's a particular type of belief system. It's an oppressive system. It's a system, an ism that is structured the same way that, you know, sexism or patriarchy is structured, or classism or racism, you know, and it's based on the same mentality that drives these other problematic isms. It's the same non-relational mentality that we've been talking about, which causes us to think of, you know, certain individuals as less worthy of having their interests honored, you know, and here we're talking about lives and deaths. It's really important to say that I'm not, and never do I, compare the victims of these different systems of oppression. The experience of each set of victims will always be unique, but the mentality that drives them is the same. It's the same mentality that causes us to disconnect from our empathy, from others, and from our rationality to a large degree. So like, for example, if you imagine, this is the example I always use, imagine that you're not a vegan and you're sitting down and you're eating, biting into a hamburger, and your dining companion turns to you and says, well, that hamburger is actually made from golden retrievers. Chances are what you had just thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. So your thoughts here completely changed. Your perceptions completely changed. And therefore your feelings will completely change. What you just felt was delicious, you now suddenly feel is disgusting. And now your feelings drive your behaviors. So your behaviors probably completely change. Instead of continuing to eat the hamburger, you probably want to throw it in the trash and maybe even take to the streets and protest. CARNISM distorts our perceptions, our thoughts, disconnects us from our natural feelings, our empathy, and drives our behaviors. So through CARNISM, we don't see dead animals as dead animals. We see them as food. We perceive them as delicious, and we eat them. So your reaction to the golden retriever burger, that's your authentic reaction. That's the way, you would react, that you react to the idea of eating an animal that you haven't been deeply, deeply conditioned to disconnect from.
Yeah, deeply is so true, because I remember when we were very little, we used to go to our granny and granddad's every Sunday, and we'd have to drive there. And I remember passing by all the sheep and going, lamb. We were going to eat lamb, and like Granny always cooked lamb on a Sunday, and there was lambs in the field, and it was, Daddy, is the lamb in the fields the same as the lamb that Granny feels? And somehow, obviously you trust your parents and you follow your parents, and you just kind of, no, it is the same, but don't worry, we all eat blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of went along with it. But the start of the programming had, the modeling, obviously it started because you just follow what your tribe does. And then when you start to question it, if you're, unless you're strong and really understand it, the culture tends to consume you. The
it just pulls you right back in. Yeah, it just pulls you right back in. And children do. Like, a lot of children will at some point question it, be like, oh, where does chicken come from?
Yeah.
Well, chicken comes from chickens. What? Chicken comes from, wait, we're eating chickens, and then we get re-socialized and pulled back into this carnistic cocoon of unknowing. And so this mentality, I call it the carnistic mentality. It's the same. It's this non-relational mentality that causes us to violate the formula without realizing what we're doing.
It's all based around dignity. It's the dignity bit that we're typically violating. Oh, both. Actually, integrity, because we're not treating the chicken the way we want to be treated.
Or the way we imagine our dog would want to be treated. Yeah. Right? Like, it's a lot easier for us to practice the formula toward our dog or our cat because we recognize them as beings, and we haven't been so deeply socialized to think of them as abstractions, as objects, to disconnect from them. And frankly, many, many people, when they're up close with chickens and with cows and with pigs and even with fish, do not feel comfortable eating them. I was working on my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating animals, and I was interviewing people who killed their own animals for food. They would say, I don't name the chickens I'm going to kill. No way. And, one guy was like, I named some chickens and that's that, not going to kill them. I mean, some people can override this natural impulse, their empathy, but we can override our empathy when it comes to not harming humans as well. It doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. But most people are very uncomfortable with the idea of causing unnecessary harm to other animals. Most people cringe at images of animals suffering.
I find it amazing. I think they put lots of rodent poison down near the beach, somewhere down there. And I saw a big rat on the middle of the footpath, and you see everyone going past going, oh, or like they're mostly disgusted, but sometimes I've seen a fox or something there and everyone walks by and goes, oh, the poor fox, and it's going, you hypocrite. You probably had chicken for dinner and you probably had bacon at least once this week, and you're giving it about the fox. And like, obviously it's so deeply socialized, and most people just do it because that's just what everyone does and don't think about it. But the irony, the fox gets empathy, after it's been killed, whereas a chicken or or a cow or any of these other animals don't typically get
You're
any
totally
empathy.
right. I mean, and I would say, if it had been a pig on the beach, the individual pig, people probably would have stopped. Or a cow on the beach who was also dead, lying there dead or suffering. People probably would have stopped and expressed empathy because their defenses, their carnistic defenses would have been broken through. So let me explain what I mean by this.
Carnistic defenses is amazing.
So we are, because we are hardwired to feel empathy for others, because most people care about other animals and would never want to contribute to their suffering, especially when that suffering is completely unnecessary, and also very extensive. Carnism needs to use these defense mechanisms, to get us to continue supporting it, essentially. These are psychological defenses that distort our perceptions and disconnect us from our empathy for these animals. And so one defense is, to simplify it, we'll call it abstraction. We learn to think of farmed animals as abstractions, so we don't think about pigs as having their own personalities, their own characteristics, as individuals with, unique lives that matter to them, just like all of our lives matter to us, just like our dog, we know our dog's lives matter to them. We just think in our minds, a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. Another defense is objectification, so we think of farmed animals as objects, as things rather than beings.
Commodities.
So, as commodities, which they literally, are being used as. So when we refer to the chicken on our plate, we refer to that as something rather than someone, right? But when our carnistic defenses are broken through, when we see an individual, so say we see an individual chicken who's lying on the beach, who's been poisoned, and there are no other chickens around, that chicken's not an abstraction anymore. That's an individual. That chicken is not necessarily seen as an object, especially if the chicken is still slightly alive. We break through carnistic defenses, and you can see this over and over again. People go to petting zoos to pet the farmed animals who they would rescue if they saw suffering. And, then they may go to the grocery store next door and leave with packages of bacon and eggs. But breaking through the defenses is so, so important. And, and one of the reasons that I wrote How to End Injustice Everywhere, I wrote it for a lot of reasons, but it's because many people who are aware of the fact that injustices toward humans are, reflect this, a problematic mentality. They may not have given it a name before, but, a problematic way of thinking, don't include animals in the conversation. And they don't recognize that the very same mentality that causes us to harm the dignity, violate our integrity, and harm the dignity of humans, causes us to violate our integrity toward animals and harm the dignity of animals. And that this mentality will reproduce itself. It's like we could achieve justice for all human beings, but as long as we are engaging, we are like watering the seeds of the non-relational mentality when it comes to animals, we're going to keep reproducing this same problematic mindset.
Same with nature as well.
Same with nature.
Dominion over nature.
Totally.
There's no respect and there's no dignity for nature. It's just, they're once again, they're commodities which we can abstract